Quakers and Vermonters clash in White Creek in the Revolution. In 1765, Duncan McVicker of the 55th Scottish Highlanders drew his military grant of 2,000 acres of White Creek land. He purchased an additional 3,000 acres of brother officers and brought it all together to form the Durham and Clarendon Manor of White Creek and Shaftesbury. This tract and others granted under New York authority overlap patents given by Governor Wentworth of New Hampshire. Under the charter given to the Duke of York by Charles II in 1644, the New York colony extended to the Connecticut River, but the New York authorities had compromised with Massachusetts and Connecticut, agreeing to honor a line 20 miles east of the Hudson River. New Hampshire claimed a similar western extension, and without reaching a formal agreement with New York as Massachusetts and Connecticut had done, Governor Wentworth proceeded to issue patents to the land beyond the Green Mountains. From 1749 to 1763, he issued 163 such patents. Shortly, settlers from both colonies began moving onto the same land. Settlers strove with settler over the validity of their titles. The two governors sent protests back and forth. In desperation, they asked the king to rule on the question. His decision favored the Yorkers, but the Vermont settlers refused to get off the land, or pay for it a second time in order to remain. Duncan McVicker's daughter Anna wrote that the conversation of these people was tainted with Cromwellian politics, and that they refused to be slaves to arbitrary power. In 1770, McVicker, alarmed at the widespread declaration of republicanism, embarked for Scotland, leaving his Clarendon and Durham manor in charge of his friend and countryman John Monroe of Shaftesbury Hollow. Monroe accepted an appointment as Justice of the Peace under New York authority, and undertook to protect McVicker's interests, but to no avail. Sheriff Tenike of Albany with the king's writs was equally helpless, and met the first open rebellion to royal authority that was expressed anywhere in the American colonies. Just as war between the two provinces seemed imminent, the Revolution broke out, and the controversy was put aside in the common interest. The Revolution in White Creek, as elsewhere, had all the elements of civil war. Families were divided in their loyalty. Brothers were hostile to brothers. Mutual distrust was everywhere, and many an individual suspect. At Seth Chase's tavern, a party of visitors from Kinderhook, it is said, feigned Tory sentiments in order to test the local people. When the White Creek men learned that their visitors were from Kinderhook, they accused them of not merely feigning such sentiments, but of being Tories in truth, for they had heard that the locality was a loyalist nest. Nevertheless, there was a sizable body of loyalist feeling in White Creek, although it did not even begin to match the sentiment that favored the cause of liberty. Simeon Covell of White Creek, Cambridge district supervisor, formed a company of loyalists and fought on the side of the British during the Burgoyne invasion. On August 15, 1777, the day before the Battle of Bennington, Lieutenant Colonel Blom skirmished with several White Creek settlers near Waite's Corners. The Bennington battlefield bronze map, see page 63, charts the action of this engagement in the four towns where it took place: White Creek, Hoosick, Shaftesbury, and Bennington. The fiercest phase of the battle was the fighting on Jewett's Cobble, which opened with an assault by Colonel Nichols' detachment approached from the White Creek side. The old well where Nichols' men paused to refresh themselves is pointed out today on a field in the Donald George farm. Benedict, in his History of the Baptists, says, during the battle some of the members of Elder Waite's church went over to the enemy, and during the bloody conflict, the heavens and earth witnessed a shocking spectacle of brethren who but a few days before had sat together at the table of the Lord, and reigned in direful hostility against each other amidst the clangor of arms and the rage of battle. Brother fighting against brother, such are the horrors and unnatural effects of war. No, tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ascalon. This melancholy affair threw the church into confusion and entirely broke it up. In spite of Burgoyne's careless response, this defeat is the affair at St. Croix's Bridge. It has been appraised by Bancroft and other historians as the true turning point of the Revolution. Here, then, the fates decreed those movements of men to occur that were to shape the nation's destiny. What had the fortunes of war been reversed? If the sought-for supplies had fallen to the British, would Saratoga have been won or lost? corrections on this. On page 89, Duncan McVicker actually got 4,000 acres that he purchased in addition to his own, so he had 6,000 total. He went back to Scotland in mid-1768, not 1770. John Monroe's foulest patent was in West Arlington along the Bantonkill. He may have moved down to Shaftesbury Hollow after he bought out Duncan McVicker late in the 1770s. But that's about it for that. Chapter 12, Stagecoach Days, Turnpikes and Covered Bridges. From the close of the Revolution through the first half of the 1800s, White Creek enjoyed its period of greatest progress. During this time, the rural areas of the town became more densely populated than they have been at any time since. In 1799, the Northern Turnpike Company was formed. This company built an improved road from Lansingburg through Cambridge to Granville, which connected near Hampton with a similar road to Burlington, Vermont. Until the railroad was built through White Creek in 1852, it was the chief means of communication north and south. Over it passed endless processions of teams with the settlers' produce bound for the markets in Lansingburg. The coaches and four kept regular schedules, and inns along the route made for the passengers' comfort. A log tavern had been built on the Great Road 3 miles south of Cambridge by James Cowden in 1763. In 1775, he replaced the log house with a commodious frame building. And paint, having been recently introduced, did the exterior in red and white squares resembling a checkerboard. The turnpike, which followed the Great Road past the Cowden Tavern, which became known as the Checkered House. Cowden and his successors had long gained such a reputation for their hospitality that the query how far to the Checkered House was often heard. In April 1816, Cambridge, which had been annexed to Washington County, was subdivided to form the additional towns of White Creek and Jackson. The turnpike became the dividing line. The first covered bridge was built at Buskirk's in 1804. At Eagle Bridge, the crossing had always been made by ferry in summer and ice in winter. In 1818, John King organized a company which built a pontoon bridge at this point. But the following year, Joe and Dave Niles, the White Creek drovers, returning from the west with a large herd of cattle, could not prevent the rush of the herd across the bridge, which collapsed when the animals stampeded. In 1825, the Hoosick and White Creek Bridge Company spanned the stream at this point with a covered bridge. Joe and Dave Niles were born on a farm in the west part of the town of Shaftesbury. In the year 1840, they moved into the village of White Creek, Dave having married a daughter of Paul Cornell and taken up his residence in the old Cornell mansion. Fabulous tales of the exploits of the Niles brothers are told to this day in White Creek and Shaftesbury. During the first half of the century, they became virtually the land barons of the two towns, buying all the property they could lay hands on to further their speculative interest in land and cattle. They followed the colorful life of the drover. They traveled on horseback and paid for their cattle in currency. Because they could buy more cheaply with gold than with bills, they carried a considerable amount of gold in their saddlebags. There would be about 10 men, and all with revolvers. They didn't fear being robbed. In fact, of the two, they solicited trouble rather than avoiding it. They would get to Wyoming country in early April, buying cattle and paying for them on the spot. They would say to the farmers, "We can get these cattle when we come back for them, whether you are home or not." They rode away with no thought of coming after the animals for 2 months. When they did come, in many instances, the farmers tried to collect for pasturing. If he locked his gate, they tore down his fences and drove the cattle into the road. There was always an advance agent who rode ahead of the drive to notify the taverns that the Nileses would be there that night. He warned residents to keep their gates shut, to get men and boys out to prevent the animals from trespassing. And if they did trespass, landowners were seldom paid for it. There were drover laws. You had no right to stop these drovers. Their arrangements were made ahead, and they must reach their destination that night. If your cattle got in with their herd, you had to wait until night to look them up. Sheep husbandry was introduced into White Creek on an industrial scale about 1810, and by 1850 the combined flocks numbered as high as 40,000 animals. Cambridge became a mart for wool second to no place in the country. Some of the pure-blooded merino stock from White Creek are said to have been shipped to Australia, marking the beginning of the sheep industry on that continent. Miss Sarah Hanna in the northeast part of town had a single flock of more than 3,000 animals. The hilly districts afforded extensive and excellent pasturage. Stephen Barker and Simeon Sweet had 2,000. The Keys, C.G. Barber, and J. Lake had flocks of nearly 1,000. The creamery established in White Creek Village in 1877 by J.B. Germain of Albany was a boon to the farms of the town, and it was a great loss to the community when it was destroyed by fire in 1927. Garner Wilkinson, an early proprietor of Weed's Hotel, did manufacturing also. In his woodworking shop he made coach bodies, axe handles, size snails, etc. Sylvanus Tabor, who came to White Creek as a shoemaker in 1803, subsequently established a mitten factory and tannery in the village, which employed a number of people and provided a market for hides. Stephen, a son of Sylvanus, followed the same trade as his father, and continued the mitten factory after his father's death in 1848. The enterprise was abandoned about 1885. Sylvanus Tabor's old account books reveal the names of some of White Creek's residents during Stagecoach times, among them the following: Warren Bunker, Henry H. Burrington, Elias Huntington, Martin Mann, Ashley Witherell, Ebenezer Allen, George Jocelyn, Tappan March, Stephen Williams, Armin Cornell, James Houghton, Joseph Richards, Levi Bristol, Reman Whitney, Henry Cotton, Christopher Allen, Benjamin Perrine, Joseph Stewart, George Richards, Solomon Fuller, Gilbert Allen, Benjamin Orcutt, Norman Hardin, Weston Cornell, Luther Ford, Andrew Cole, Jason Stewart, Sylvia Burt, Sylvester Stewart, Ann Fisher, John March, Samuel Cross, William Duncombe, Burdick Allen, Paul Cornell, John Stevens, John Allen, Ezra Lamb, William Richards, Christopher Dexter, David Mosher, Benjamin Wheeler, Seneca Mosher, Abraham Hazelton, Joshua Gardner, John Madison, Theodore Welch, John Brooks, Silas Palmer, Benjamin Merritt, Joseph Niles, and Hiram Chase. The White Creek Village Harness Shop is pictured on page 47, an essential service indeed in those days of horse-drawn vehicles. On page 90 I would point out that there were more loyalists than there were probably people on the other side. And Seth Chase was arrested and imprisoned as being a loyalist and then sent to New Hampshire as a prisoner. They took pity on him up there and let him go home, but after the war he moved north. His tavern was never reopened. That's about the only comment or correction I'd have on that section, I guess.